Hello. Today I will be talking about the use of solitary confinement as punishment in the United States prison system. I want to note that this issue has and still is being debated, but in this speech I will share what I have found in my research on what solitary confinement as punishment does to prisoners. The use and practice of solitary confinement in the United States prison is cruel and unusual, and that it is a violation of the Eighth Amendment, as it can negatively affect the mind and mental health of a prisoner. First, let's describe what conditions solitary confinement looks like and include. Solitary confinement in prisons involve placing a prisoner in a confined cell, removing and severely limiting them from human contact. The reason for someone to be put in solitary confinement can vary, from serious infractions to minor ones as well, and is routinely used in prisons across America. A prisoner who is put in solitary confinement can expect to be placed in a single cell, often average-sized 8 by 10 feet. They can remain there for 22 hours to 24 hours a day. They are restricted from rehabilitative or educational programs and can be limited from reading or their personal property. The length one is placed in solitary confinement varies, from days to months to even years, as there is little to no regulation on how long one can be placed in solitary confinement. These spaces include an immovable bed, an immovable desk, a sink, and a toilet. Other times they will include a shower if cells are meant to hold a prisoner for a long time, such as in the case of supermax prisons made up entirely of solitary confinement cells. It is estimated that about 80,000 to 100,000 people are given solitary confinement a year. This includes men, women, and children. One might think solitary confinement is a relatively harmless and relaxed punishment a prisoner might experience. The reality is the mental toll solitary confinement takes on prisoners has an incredibly long-term and damaging effect and can lead to serious mental health issues. Studies have shown again and again that placing people in isolation for extended periods of time is shown to cause drastic changes onto one's mind. This includes, but is not limited to, PTSD, hallucinations, and distortions in perception and in time. It is common knowledge that humans are social creatures. We interact with others almost every day, in the smallest ways like reading someone's posts online and passing others on the streets, to larger ways like forming friendships and relationships. These interactions are what define us as humans. Taking these away from people has horrendous psychological repercussions that have lasting results. Studies have shown that solitary confinement does have an effect on the brain itself. As one article discusses, one of the most remarkable effects of chronic social isolation, as in the extreme case of solitary confinement, is the decrease in the size of the hippocampus, the brain region related to learning, memory, and spatial awareness. The sustained stress of extreme isolation leads to a loss of hippocampal plasticity, a decrease in the formation of new neurons, and the eventual failure of hippocampal functions. Due to recent events, much of the American population has had to isolate themselves, and we have heard again and again how people are struggling with this new normal we must endure. What we are experiencing is not even a fraction of how inmates deal with being placed in solitary confinement, yet we are feeling the results of how isolation can negatively affect us. The effects don't stop when solitary confinement ends. Once an inmate has been released from solitary confinement, they will have to readjust to the previous conditions they were living in. Oftentimes, inmates will have experienced sensory deprivation from the isolation and will be overwhelmed after being brought back into social places. These effects from isolations can be even more dangerous to inmates after being released. After an inmate's released, data has shown that the more time people spend in restrictive housing as a percentage of their total incarceration, the greater risk of death in the first year after their release. No person, regardless of the crimes they committed, should ever have to experience any form of torture, and it is shown that solitary confinement is a form of psychological torture. American politicians and lawmakers condemn the use of torture in countries such as Iraq and North Korea. However, the persistent use of solitary confinement shows that we torture our inmates as well. The United Nations has stated that countries should ban solitary confinement in most cases. Solitary confinement shows to cause negative and damaging ramifications on inmates' minds and mental health, and these effects can last for years on end. It's with all this evidence, it shows that solitary confinement is indeed a violation of the Eighth Amendment, as it is exceedingly a form of cruel and unusual punishment. Thank you for listening to my speech. If there's any questions about solitary confinement, I will be happy to discuss with the replies below.